Hi, welcome to this episode of The Latest Thread. This time we're talking about quick quilts. You get a call on Thursday that your niece's best friend's cousin needs a baby quilt by Sunday. So, um, just like what are the easy go-to can get them done in a Saturday afternoon patterns. I know we all have favorites. We submitted pictures. So Sharon will share her screen and we'll tell you a little bit about what our favorite quick quilts are.
Okay, so this pattern is called Shortcake. And just like Karen was mentioning about that quilt that you need in a minute, I believe it's by Cluck South. Don't want to forget about that. And the reason why I like that, number one, if you it's Jelly Roll Frankly, or in my case, I have a lot of fabric that's maybe a little older, and you can cut that up, do little 9 patches and little strips with the solid background. You can use up a lot of fabric, and it's perfect for if you need a charity quilt or baby quilt. It goes together very quickly, and as I said, main thing, you can use up your fabric. And this pattern I chose, there's actually, it's from a BQ series. There's several patterns by Maple Island Quilts. And the reason why I like that and have used one of the variations several times, because if you have fabrics that are larger scale prints, it's a great quilt to use focus fabrics. And it also goes together very quick because it's almost like improv. It takes a little bit getting used to cut, because you have to cut these long wedges, in a certain way, but you do it all at once. I know that doesn't make sense the way I'm saying it, but it takes a minute to get used to how they are cut, and they're all cut pretty much the same way from the whole series. But I like it because you can use up some larger scale prints, and they really stand out nice, and it goes together quick.
Yeah, so patterns aren't my thing. So if I needed, a gift or something like that, I would make something like this where you just pull out your my scrap thing and put things together to make it big enough to be something. So yeah, I mean, I think in my life I made 2 quilts from patterns, and I don't like it. It's too much reading, and then I overanalyze, like, what do they mean? Do they mean this? Do they mean that? I'm like, yeah, no, I think I'll just sew things together. And since I like to make modern stuff, then, I can pull that off pretty easy, I guess. So if I had to pick an actual like traditional quilt and I had to make something for someone, I would probably just make a 9-patch because you don't really need a pattern for that.
So are you just random grabbing a chunk of fabric and just squaring it off? Like you're adding strips around?
No, you just sew. Yeah, you cut that weird random shape and then you just sew strips and then you make it square. You know what I mean? Then you can turn the ruler or just.
So you like have your print and a white, and then you just chop it by turning the ruler, right?
Okay. Yeah, or whatever. Yeah. Usually, really for me, my preference would be to just grab out big chunks of solid fabrics that I have. You make something and you have these big pieces that aren't really useful for anything else, and just sew them randomly together. Because then the quilting part's easier to me than the piecing part. So then you can just have fun with the quilting more so than the piecing.
Well, but in this case, what you're showing here, it is super scary and overwhelming to me because I don't understand your concept of just grabbing and sewing random pieces random.
No, you take a
Right.
piece of fabric and you cut some random shape, and then
Yeah.
you put strips around it, like you would,
Kind
you
of
know,
like improv.
but
Yeah.
not
Almost
really.
like a square and a square scood.
But
Yeah,
at some point, things have to match up. And that's where it becomes scary because I'm not a math person.
but these are squares. They're perfect squares. They just don't have to match up because they're all edged with the same
Fabric.
fabric.
Right, because you can see right here, if I
Yeah,
zoom
between
in,
those brown ones, there's a seam.
there's a seam right here where she's joined a strip, and I think there's a seam there to make it a block.
Yeah, they're actually squares. They just don't appear to be.
Yeah.
And there's no rhyme or reason.
That kind of piecing is really actually very freeing, and although it's scary to initially look at it, it really is freeing, and it's a really good way to teach beginners to quilt and kids because they don't have to worry about everything being perfect.
Yeah, and so this is the thing. I don't like improv because it's the same reason I can't make a scrap quilt. I can't.
But this
No.
is like organized improv.
It is. It's totally organized. That's why they always end in a square, that the squares get sewed together, or a strip and the strips get, because I just can't do that pulling things, and I need more.
But you work scrappy, but you're a color controlled scrappy. So you're working
Yeah.
within a certain color grouping, but you're still got a variety of prints. So you're
Oh yeah.
like
And they're
kind of,
deep.
you're just about, if we pushed you off the edge just a little bit,
Project
so
Scrappy.
close.
Project Scrappy.
Well, I have to try it, but
It looks fun. Oh, that one's really tiny. Let me make
It is
it,
tiny. And
enlarge that.
tell people this is my go-to pattern because I know it like the back of my hand. Like I don't, it's Turning 20 by Trisha Cribbs, and she's done a million different, like Turning 22, Turning 20 again. But, and I have to say, if you looked at the cover of this pattern, you'd be like, yeah, not interested at all. But I taught a class eons ago, and you can use any fabrics you want, and you don't even have to use 20 fat quarters. Like if you have 5 colors that you want to make the quilt out of, just do it by 4 times, you know? And it literally cuts in like less than a half an hour. And I don't like all that prep stuff. I just want to, get it sewn, mindless sewing, and then quilt it. So Turning 20 it's like 3 cuts of a fat quarter, like 1, 2, and 3. And then you just mix them all up and there's your quilt. If I have to get a quilt done that afternoon, I'm doing a strip piece rail fence because that's even quicker, but
And no seam matching.
no seam matching. Just keep flipping them. Done. Perfect.
Yeah, I like that one too.
Yeah. So that's my go-to, you need a quilt this weekend.
It's one of those patterns that's more about the fabric, I think. Like you can really show off. You've got really pretty fabric. You don't want to cut it really small. It's great to showcase different prints.
And I've done it with solids and then appliqued like the Laurel Birch butterflies. I fussy cut them out and then applicate them all over a Turning 20 that was solid fabric. So it's fun and quick.
and what Sharon was saying earlier about, beginners or young people learning how to quilt. I remember when my mother-in-law started quilting, that's actually the pattern she started with, and because she's obviously older and, was intimidated. So it was a great beginner pattern. The only thing I can say about that pattern, because I've seen it happen with my mother-in-law, if you buy a collection of fabric or even a fat quarter, bundle, that it becomes difficult because there are so many like values in a collection, that when you lay these blocks all out on the bed, to get them organized somewhat, then it can become challenging.
Well,
So
that's
you're much better off grabbing from your scrap, from your stash, and do that scrappy.
I like to do them themed. Like this one is all animals, or this one is all just greens. So I get away from my tones and values and just have fun. If it's quilt, quilt. If it's quick, you're not thinking that much about anything anyway,
Lay down.
Yep.
So it's 3 pieces in a block.
Yeah, it's like there's 3 pieces in the block, but your first
Skinny
is
one.
on your outside edge. So you first cut that off and then put it to the side, and then it's the 1 long column and the 2 shorts.
Yeah.
I have to say about scrappy quilts, because I love scrappy, we know that, but Ava was saying it gets challenging, but I find that the more fabrics you use, the easier that gets. I literally usually rarely use a design wall for scrappy quilts. I pick the blocks up and just sew them, because the more fabrics you have, the less chance there are of things being side by side. So, you know, after you do it for a little while, it does get a little bit easier using that kind of variety.
Yeah, we'll take your word for that, Sharon.
That's fine. It doesn't happen right away, but this is my quilt behind me. This is probably my go-to pattern. And I really had to think about when Karen suggested this topic, because my go-to quilt isn't necessarily my fastest quilt to make, but I had to think about what pattern I've made the most, which probably makes sense that it's kind of my go-to. And that a go-to pattern, one of the things is criteria for me, is one that looks good in a whole bunch of different genres of fabric. So the K Facette pastels, Hot for Chocolate, and this was my original quilt. I've made 2 of them just like that, and that's why it's called antiqued. Was the original was very worn and faded and just kind of loved looking and soft, and all values that were really, really close. And then I made one with skulls and flames and guitars and creepy stuff inside there. So I mean, I think that's definitely one of the criteria, is a pattern that would look good in a variety of different fabrics. And so that's my go-to. And it's not too slow, because the bulk of the block is a big hourglass in the center, but then there's some 2 rounds of courthouse steps that are a little bit narrower, just to balance out the scale of it. But I think it goes pretty quickly together, considering some of the really busy quilts that I've done. So it's fast for me.
The other part of being fast for you, if you know it, and like that, like I would totally make those center blocks and bypass your courthouse steps and just make bigger sashes.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I mean, that if you know the pattern and you use it all the time, and I'm sorry to say that, that's awful. But I mean, like that, if you have a limited amount of time and you know it, you can make changes or revisions or whatever you want to call it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like you said, when you do your turning 20, you literally make your 2 cuts and you're off to the races, right? You kind of get into a groove with it, and you almost don't even have to pull the pattern out at some point anymore, right?
That's why the picture's so tiny.
It was really tiny.
But it is, it's only like a pamphlet pattern too. It's like, you know, one of those cardboardy things.
It wouldn't be that long there wouldn't be that much stuff to type.
Right.
Right.
So in follow up to that, like, I guess it would be our go-to edge to edges, like a quick edge to edge that somebody just wants this quilted right away. I'm sure we all have our go-tos. Maybe 1 or 2 go-tos.
Yeah, I have them here. I'm going to bring them up and do a new screen share. Oh, and this one's mine first. I guess we'll pick up where we left off. Mix it up. Just nice, fairly even density amount of quilting, a little bit of fun with a kind of a spiraling pinwheel, a couple feathers and some swirls and a paisley and a couple pearls here and there. So, and as you can see, a variety of quilts. It just looks really good on all different kinds of quilts. So
I like that little pinwheel in there.
You know, I'm loving that little pinwheel on the center one. I'm like, ooh.
Right? Like if you look right there, it's like, and it just a little bit of swirling movement here and there instead of pinwheel after pinwheel after pinwheel. So
well, I actually like that, because I'm not looking for the path. When I see edge to edges, my brain immediately wants to find the path, and there's enough going on that I guess my OCD is satisfied. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think for me, one of the things that I would look for in an edge to edge go-to pattern is not areas of the pattern that are really densely quilted, and then other areas that are really too open. Because if you've got smaller piecing, you want the quilting to touch all of those patches. And if you've got bigger sections, you just have no idea where those are going to land. So a nice even density is probably one of our top criteria for a go-to edge-to-edge pattern. And this one's fairly new. We just started using it this last year. So, and our number one, this has got to be like our, you know how they have Pantone of the year. I think this is our Panto of the year. We we use this pattern so much because, again, it's one of those ones that looks great on everything. And it has a fairly nice even density. And the more we share pictures of it, the more we get requests for that specific pattern. And this one down here in the bottom is even done at a tinier scale. She wanted it really much more dense than the rest of them that we had done. So even scaled down, it almost looks like raindrop puddles, like in a pond or something, where they kind of start to ripple out kind of thing. And this one's my favorite.
Yeah, it's like perfect for that quilt.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't think we've put it on anything that we've been unhappy with. Probably looks a little bit more modern. Probably still look okay on a traditional quilt, but yeah. And I like how the circles aren't right exactly on top of each other. They have a little bit of a stagger so it doesn't look rowy. So, and that we just started using that one this past year too, and it's been one of our favorite go-tos.
Well, that one I picked as a go-to because, I quilt for other people in my area. They're predominantly more traditional quilts. And so this one gets chosen a lot, Fantasia by Lorian Quilting. And I like it because it's not very dense and it gives a lot of movement. I do not only use it on super traditional quilts, because even on, floral quilts, it looks really nice. I use it on many different types of quilts. Um, the density I like, or the size I like to use it in, is about 10 inches, then it looks really good. The only thing is, unlike Sharon's suggestion for both of her patterns, that was nice and square, so you don't have to deal with, having gaps, it offsets more when it nests. So you have to be more careful when you set it up, but I use that so many times. I can do that. And this one is probably the most popular one, because again, so many people love floral prints and those rose type, fabrics. And the reason why I like it, because it's fairly open. And so it stitches, pretty quickly, depending on what size you choose for it. But it's nice and open, and it just goes again with a variety of quilts. So I chose a couple more traditional type patterns because that is what I, am asked to use a lot.
So this is mine. This is not a panto, but this is probably the one thing I do more than anything else as an edge to edge freehand is just random, I just chalk a wavy line across. Every row, the wavy line is different. They just nest because you make them nest. And it's funny because a lot of times people will say, I want that design that you used on. They think it's a panto.
Mhm.
It's not. It's just that I do it so much that it probably does look almost identical every time just because it's so automatic. And I think it's so, I don't know, flowy, I guess. The movement's good when the quilt's busy and stuff. Or I do the same thing with just leaves instead of feathers. It's kind of the two all the time ones.
Mhm. And when you draw your spine, is it just kind of like a big oversized meander? Or?
No. Well, yeah, but it goes from one side to the other, not like kind of
All over back.
traveling all over.
Okay,
Unless it was going to be tiny, maybe, yeah, I would.
great. Yeah, I guess in order to keep it open and flowing, it's going to have to be bigger, right?
Well, yeah, and that's the other part of it. So if they have a super, like if they want it to be loose, I can just make the feathers way bigger.
Mm-hmm.
If it needs to be tighter, like on a baby quilt, then I would do it smaller. But yeah,
Mhm.
it's like a no-brain. And then this picture is actually of the digital version of this because then I have it's the only way I have a picture of it. But this too, I do this and I have the ability with my Elevate to do it digitally, but frankly, I do it freehand because for me, it's just easier. You can't mess it up because, you just randomly mark again a wavy line, divide it up wavy this way. And you just start at the left and fill it in with a spiral. You shoot right out of one and you can't mess it up. And even if you did, no one's going to know because,
Hmm.
usually, I mean, the only time
on this, because you did this in something that I was looking at, and I'm like, yep, I'm hooked.
I love the texture. I mean, it's really cool.
It is. And it just, the way it travels from one to the other, you're like, ha, that was easy.
Well, yeah, and I can't go back out. It's not I don't ever leave enough room.
And just by looking at that, I guess we could also remember that when we look at some of those edge-to-edge designs, how we can adapt them, especially with something like that. If we're looking for something to put in blocks, where sometimes you just draw a blank. And if you look through your edge-to-edge designs, we can adapt those for other parts of the quilt that's not an edge-to-edge.
Yeah, I do this actually as a background fill a lot because you just mark a wavy grid tiny and do the same thing.
Oh, that's smart. I have to give that a try. So in this picture, it's not freehand.
No.
Okay. So as I say, if that's freehand, you're really consistent.
Well, and you'll notice even in the digital pattern, it's not perfectly spaced because it needs to be like I like them to look free-handed, I guess, I don't want it to be so perfect. I don't.
Yeah. Organic.
Yeah, certain things I like to be perfect, like ruler work and all that kind of thing, but some things I feel like just need to not be perfect.
Nope. It's me. This is call it threes and E's because that's all I see. And it started out as just me being lazy. And this is a picture of the digital. Both of my go-tos are now digital, but I still do them, like Jodi said, freehand because it's way faster for me. But I call it threes and E's because it just looks like threes and E's. But all it is just really open and different spaced scrolls. That's all it is. But it goes really fast. And I mean, you can do them real big and then real small. It's about filling space fast. That's what I use.
Yeah, and a lot of times for edge to edge, I mean, that's.
And just like that, all over hearts. But you see, they all start out with little scrolls too. Because I guess you get your stitch that you like doing. I mean, if you're doing it hand guided, you get that stitch that you like doing, and everything else springs from that. So I guess it's a scroll for me. Because if I were to do all over leaves, it would still start with a scroll. So
That is interesting because you're exactly right. Like if you go to doodle with a piece of paper, I always start with the same thing and then it turns into something else, but it usually always starts the same.
it's like the on button. It tells my brain, oh, wait, we're doing something. We're going to start with that swirl and we're going to put the leaf. Yeah. So I guess, anything that fills space quickly and evenly is a good pattern to use a lot if that's what you're working on. So Anybody have anything else to add?
I just wanted to maybe expand a little bit more on what Ava said about the nesting amount.
Mhm.
And that is definitely one of the things that we look for in fast edge to edge, is because the more nesting you have, the more repeats that you have to, or more rows you have to advance for. So it's nice to have a little bit of a dip so that it still nests a smidgen and there's not a really visible space, but not ones that are too deep.
And
sure.
that's, if you're hand guiding, you're nesting them automatically.
That's right. Yeah.
But it's the same thing. Even if you're hand guiding, you don't want to finish across straight. You want to smooth it. That way your eye never sees that straight line.
Yeah. Leave a little bit of a jig here and there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's kind of the cool thing, right? So when a freehand person draws a digital pattern, I think you think way so much about that.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I like to make ones that have like
Just a little.
be a very distinct line at the top, but I want it to be so that you have to leave space, because that ends up making the design complete, if that makes sense. Because I don't want to have to worry about getting it perfectly lined up and that this is going to match.
Yeah, like those ones that are real jagged. I'm like, oh, yeah.
Yeah, but I like when they have built-in leeway.
Yeah.
I guess is the.
So, well, that was fun. We're going to take a little break. And when we come back, we're going to have some ideas for Joanne's quilt. So we'll see you in a minute.
Today I get to show you Gamo's new professional bobbin winder. This little machine kicks out absolutely perfect bobbins every single time. It's quiet, it's simple to use, and it's built to last forever. You know, I've got to tell you, I've used all kinds of different bobbin winders over the years, and after using this one, I am completely in love with this machine. Obviously, one of the things you need for perfect stitches is a perfect bobbin. And this machine delivers one every single time. It only takes about 30 seconds start to finish, so you can wind several bobbins while staying at the machine, or since it stops by itself, you can walk away and come back when you need that bobbin. And now I'll just pull the finished bobbin off, drag the thread down through the thread cutter, and there we have one perfect bobbin. Check out how evenly this bobbin is wound, and the thread tension on this bobbin is perfectly consistent from the first stitch to the last.
Hi, welcome back. And now we are excited for the ideas for your quilt section. We have Joanne with us. So Joanne, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I grew up in Michigan, and I've lived in Michigan, Ohio, kind of all over in the north until 20 years ago when we moved to Oklahoma. I spent a lot of time teaching writing English, teaching writing in English departments. I play the flute. About 20 years ago, when we moved to Oklahoma, is when I really started quilting in earnest. So it's been fun.
Yeah, that's awesome. So we see the quilt behind you there. Sharon's going to actually share it big screen. So if you want to talk about it. There it is.
Well, it was kind of an accident. I had a lot of these beautiful K-facet fabrics. I'd bought 2 10-inch packs and a fat quarter pack that they were all different lines, but they kind of coordinated. And I wanted to do something that outlined shapes in black, but I didn't know what shapes. And so before I committed to anything, I picked a couple of the fabrics, those polka dot ones in the center, that frankly I didn't like as well as the others, and tried out those elongated hexagons. And I decided I didn't want to do that. But I liked the result, and to my shock, these fabrics that I didn't think I liked looked beautiful in that center square.
Yeah.
So I stuck it up on the wall and just gradually over a period of about 6 months, I think, kind of added things until I thought, maybe I should square this off.
Yeah.
Uh,
That's always nice when the quilts tell you what they want to be, right?
yeah, exactly. So I had just enough in the 10-inch squares to make those little setting triangles. And I was surprised all along the sizes just kind of worked out.
Mhm.
You know, the triangles came out of 10-inch squares. The long pieces, I think, are 22 inches. I've forgotten, but I could do them out of a fat quarter.
Mhm.
So I don't know, it was just fun. I've never done anything like that, but I'm completely flummoxed as to how to quilt it.
We can help with that part. But I like how it's like stained glass-ish.
Uh-huh.
It looks wider than a stained glass. I like how it's like color blocked almost.
Mhm. And I think with how busy and bright and colorful those fabrics are, a little wider of a black piece is probably a little bit better than the skinny
Yeah.
typical ones for the stained glass. So yeah, it looks good.
Now that's a good thought.
Mhm. So you ready? You want me to go to the first one?
Sure.
It's a surprise. Usually we have a specific order, but I randomized them. So ready or not?
First.
I'm the winner. No. So this is mine, and you didn't say if you do ruler work or not. So
I've done a little bit, so I'm
So
glad
this,
to have an example.
I left it, I mean, it's very simple ruler work because they're just lines.
Mhm.
So I did notice because you had it hanging on your design wall, I could tell that it's small.
Yes, it's
Because
about,
if this were a bed-size quilt, I probably would not even take on a quilting thing like this. My tendency when I have something little is to go to the extreme just because it's not overwhelming because the quilt itself is small. So I really and up on the left in the outside border, I just wanted you to see what I would mark. I would just divide that up evenly.
okay.
And then I just kind of zigzagged through it, like from point to point, making those little diamonds. I guess they're just a square on point, not a diamond. And then filling around them or not, depending on how wide that is. I probably could have told that from the design wall too, but I didn't think of it then, I guess. You know, it can be easier if you don't want to add the fill, or, you know, not that the fill is hard. And I would just pick whatever fill that you like to do. You know, sometimes,
Okay.
you know, because it's actually going to be very little of it around in those little spots. And then for I did the same thing in those long strips. I would just divide it up even, and you can see on the left corner again, where I would just divide that up however it divides up evenly. And again, the same thing, because that would be all continuous. You go, you know, stitch across, back, and then you can do the fill continuous as well. And the reason I went kind of this way is that when you have busy fabrics like that, it's really hard to see a design. So I generally will go for a texture as opposed to an actual design because, you know, you won't see it as much on the busy fabrics, but you will see texture. So that's why I chose that. And the same thing on those elongated hexagons. I just would put like, I don't know how big those are. I would probably go with like 1-inch echoes in there and then alternately fill them, because then you'll get parts that you'll see a lot. And then for the background behind in those setting triangles, I would just do straight line. Kind of set, I don't know, make that center portion really stand out against something very simple and plain in the back. And I probably wouldn't stitch anything on any of the black. I would stitch in the ditch around it, you know, and I would probably also travel from bar to bar in a seam as opposed to starting and stopping each of those bars separately.
Okay. What color thread would you use?
I, I'm not a thread changer.
Uh-huh.
So I probably would go with a dark gray in a thin weight. I usually like to use like a 60 weight because then it blends. You really don't see it.
Okay.
I mean, you could change the threads though if you wanted. It's not generally even on my own quilts, I very seldom do, just because, especially with prints, it's so easy to hide it, I feel like.
Yeah. I have a weird purple that matches almost every cave fabric. And like,
Oh yeah, that would work too.
yeah, it's a weird purple. It's not, I guess, and I don't know, I'm gonna it's like almost like a lilac-y purple, but it blends with them so nice.
Mhm. Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, they are a lot in the same color tones all the time, it seems.
Yeah.
I thought of purple, but the only one I have is a very bright purple, but it seems too bright. So a weird one might be.
And it's probably, I say lilac, it's probably nothing like lilac either.
The other thing too, I would say with this, so for me, my goal would be to get the texture. You'd see those squares and things pop out. I would use a fairly puffy batting just to get the texture, to see the texture more, I guess.
Okay, that makes sense. So in terms of dimensions, the long hexagons, I think are 10 inches point to point.
Oh, okay.
I think I used the whole 10-inch square as much as I could. The strips are 4 inches.
Oh, okay.
And the inside of the border might be 2, might be 3. I've forgotten. Probably 2.
Yeah, so actually being that, like the border being as narrow as it is, I maybe wouldn't put the fill around those.
Yeah, there's not a lot of space there.
Right, I'd just leave them as is. Just, make those on point squares and leave it at that.
Okay. It's beautiful.
That's the hardest part for us, I think, is that you see it and you kind of understand how big it is, but it's hard.
I could see that would be hard. Well, that's a very beautiful design.
Thank you.
All right, so I'll move on to the next one. Again, it's going to be a surprise. Oh, it was me this time. Okay, usually I go last. So I went a little overboard in filling up the space because once I started, I just felt like I couldn't stop. And then I petered out when it got to the border. I was like, okay, my hand is tired now. Just from your notes about your quilting experience, you said that you like to do some feathers, but still real simple free motion, as well as you mentioned continuous curve. So I thought that this quilt might be a really good way to up your feather game, because the fabrics are busy enough that if you're not super happy with exactly how every feather looks, it just camouflages and blends right in. So it's a really forgiving fabric to be able to use to try some different things. I have 3 different kinds of feathers, and not to suggest that you would do 3 different kinds. You could pick one if you wanted to, but if you're going to use it to increase your feather skills, I probably would put a different feather in each spot. And so we have one feather here, a different feather here and there, as well as they're going in different directions. So this one's going in this direction, and then it turns and turns and turns, and the same thing with the other one, but going the opposite, and then back to the original direction on the last one. On the top section, I have just a tiny variation. There's a box stitched inside that floral space on the top section. On the bottom, that box is missing. So just a different visual to see, you may not like that. I would still ditch between the black and the floral print for sure though. But just a bit of a different look. And then a feather going in opposite directions in the middle section. And I did 2 of them with a bit of a frame considering the size of space that you said that is, I'd probably make that space no more than a half an inch if that's what you chose to do.
Mhm.
And then I added a feather spine into those ones because like a wider spine, because it's a bigger space. So you can get away with a little bit more of a wider spine in those. And continuous curves in the little setting squares and setting triangles around the outside edge. I just did a simple continuous curve. I probably wouldn't mix it up to do too many different ones, but again, if you try something that is maybe new to you, by the time you finish the quilt, you'll be like, hey, I have a new continuous curve design that I like to use. And I left the red markings in these sections here so that when you look at it at home up close, you can see the grid that you would draw out to be able to quilt that continuous curve.
Okay.
I would definitely leave the black unquilted, but in the inside of the quilt. And this I was kind of iffy on whether or not I would want to quilt that, but if I did, I'd probably decide very last, because if you put a feather in here, and you can see I just kind of mixed up a combination between all of the 3 styles of feathers that are inside to just kind of pull it all together. So if you decided to put a feather in there, you might not actually need quilting in here, but I wasn't sure what the width was. So I thought, well, put something there as a maybe. This outside, it looks like it's probably the same width once you get the binding on. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
It's about an inch, I think.
Yeah. So, sashing is something that, or those small little 1-inch spaces is something that I usually leave until the very end, because if I quilt it first and then I quilt everything else, then it sometimes is overwhelming. And if there's already a lot of quilting here. So I usually leave those until afterwards to just look at it overall and feel like maybe it just doesn't need anything at all and I'm done, which is great.
Okay.
But yeah, that's what I thought would be a fun idea, to just practice your feathers in some busy fabric.
I had thought about feathers, but I didn't know. So it's really nice to see that all drawn out.
Mm-hmm. And
Really?
I start drawing and then I can't stop. So I apologize for covering. But like I said, I ran out of steam when I got to the board. I was like, okay, I don't have any more hand energy.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Very lovely.
I had a conversation with someone recently about a youngster's quilt that she was making, and she wanted to custom quilt it for her granddaughter who was 6. And I was just a little bit leery about putting all that custom quilting into something that was going to be used by a very young child and probably get washed and used and worn a lot, right? But she reminded me that, hey, this is a good opportunity to practice something, and my 6-year-old's not going to care, or the 6-year-old granddaughter. She's not going to care if my feathers aren't perfect. So I thought, well, this would be a great way to practice that, because that fabric will just disguise anything that you don't like. So yeah.
Yes, and it's helpful to think of it as practice.
Mm-hmm. Well, every quilt is practice. We learn and get better
Right.
with every one. Yeah,
It is for me.
for us too.
It doesn't change.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll move on to the next one.
Oh, that is me. And you did indicate that you like feathers, and I love feathers myself. So, because even though the fabrics are busy fabrics, to me, it still looked like somewhat of a traditional flair to the quilt, because it does remind me of the stained glass window. So I did add the feathers on the elongated hexagons. And again, I would have to agree with Sharon or Jodi as well. We didn't know about the size of the space of those, the shape. So probably I would add a frame around it if they're 10 inches, because I find even if you have pretty feather plumes, if they're in that big of a space, then they just are too big. So I definitely would add a frame to it. And I added feathers in the setting triangles and the little triangles on the outside, just to kind of pull it all together. Sharon, if you can zoom in a little bit to
Sure.
general. So then I added just straight lines in those itty bitty triangles around the feathers, just to really make those feather plumes pop out, stand out, and those could be 1/4 inch. The border, I chose to go with the curlicue because it kind of goes with the shape, with the flare of the feathers. And I repeated those in alternating in the strips, did a frame and then, or an echo to the strip, and then added those in there, and then did just straight lines in the alternating one. And then in the squares, I chose to go with a curved crosshatch. Of course, that could be straight too. Obviously these are just suggestions, but to me, even as I draw these on these quilts, it kind of helps as you're drawing, starting over, as things come together, and then visually you can really picture it. Yeah, that's it. These shapes work well together or they don't. So that was my suggestion.
Yeah, and most of those are things I hadn't thought of. So that's very interesting. Now, would you use black thread, or is that just for the
Oh,
drawing?
no, that was just the markers or the pen so you could see it. I would probably, even though I like Karen's idea with that lilac color, I probably would go with the gray because it blends with everything. And those Cape Facet fabrics, a lot of times when I quilted on them, the gray blends just beautiful. And as Jodi mentioned earlier, when the fabrics are busy like that, it's more about the texture and, that you create. And for wall hanging, I probably would choose either a double bat or something a little bit loftier to really pop those feather plumes, with the 1/4 inch quilting around them.
I just want to jump in. I actually like it in black thread, but I'd be afraid of missing.
Yeah,
I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah.
you're right. It would really look very sharp, but yeah, then you have to be a really confident quilter, to tackle that.
Gotta hit every backtrack perfect.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't know that I have that kind of confidence.
Well, you see, we all said it would look really nice. We wouldn't do it, but it would look really nice.
I wouldn't do it.
So you didn't put anything in the black strips either then?
No, I did not.
Okay, good.
And they are how wide again?
I think she said
An
1
inch.
Yeah.
Okay. What I would probably say too, like Sharon, at the end, like if you unroll it, let it roll out a little bit. And if it looks like you need more quilting, what I would probably do is just add a single straight line through the center of them, just because then it would be less quilted still than everything else. So it really still, you could even do a wavy line really if
Because of it being a wall hanging, and so far the quilting ideas that we've seen are, dense quilting.
Mhm.
And so, I don't know. I
I
guess
think the suggestion of that poofy batting is really going to help fill some of that space in that, because a 1 inch is just kind of like borderline. Do I do something here or not?
yeah.
And I think that if you don't use a higher loft batting, then you more than likely want to put something in there. It'll wrinkle more. So a poofy batting will help fill that space.
because the black strips, bars, whatever you want to call them, they're your place for your eyes to rest as you look across the quilt, what's happening there. And, it just emphasizes the different sections. But I am just like Sharon. I never do those small inner borders or, little sashing strips till the very end. and then do as Jodi says and roll it and just see. I just did that on a quilt yesterday, and I'm one that tends to want to over quilt. But if I do that and I see, hey, I'm done, it does not need anything, it's not going to poof up. So that's, I guess, the determinant factor. But
Well, that's helpful advice too. I don't think I've ever waited to make that decision, and it's, it's
well,
probably a
because
good
we're
idea.
in the habit of quilting as much of the quilt all in one, swoop as possible, so we don't have to start up again. But in that case, because it just, I don't know.
Well, you could actually make that decision earlier on. You might not have to wait till the very end, but at least quilt one full section to stand back and look at it. That way on the remaining sections, you could quilt something in the sashing. If you're going to use the same color thread, you could, instead of having to go back, you could quilt those areas at the same time. But you definitely need to have a good chunk done to be able to get an overall view of whether it needs it or not.
But I think if I was to do anything in the black strips, I would choose black thread. I would not go, with the blending, whether it be gray or lilac. But that's just,
That makes good sense.
You could probably get away with the dark gray if you're using the dark gray in the colored sections, but if you're using a purple or something lighter, then it would stand out a lot more. And there's already a lot going with busy quilting and busy fabric, right?
yeah.
Totally defeat the purpose.
Okay, interesting.
So Karen, I wonder who's next.
I bet it's me. And all right, well, you'll see as soon as you turn the picture. I went super easy on this, like wimpy easy. Okay. I did kind of scroll feathers in the elongated hexagons. And I just echoed around them. And in two of the diagonal frame sections, I did the same thing. And in the center one, I just did a little scrolly fill with scrolls out in the border as well. And that's with ditching all the black and then just straight ruler work. Well, I shouldn't say straight, chevron looking, but it's still a straight line ruler work in the corners and in the smaller corners. So I went the easy way, like just simple quilting.
Yeah, but it's effective.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting combination of swirly things and straight things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
See what thought. I really hadn't thought of any of these things except feathers, which I didn't know if I would like. So this is so interesting. It's so helpful. I wish I had 4 of them to quilt.
You might make some more now.
Yeah.
Well, even if you don't make another one, you don't have to choose one of our designs. You can pull things that you like out of each one of them and mash them up and make something more unique even.
This is so helpful. I had almost given up and decided to do an edge to edge pattern. I found a fairly dense one. It looks like flames when it's printed out, but it looks more like tree bark when it's quilted. And I almost, about the time I saw your invitation to submit a quilt, I thought, well, maybe I should hold off just a little bit.
Well, we're glad you did.
Oh, me too.
Yeah, make sure when you do finish it, go ahead and share it back in the Gamma groups and just tag latest thread or any one of us, because we would love to see it, as well as anyone else would love to see it too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
I will.
Even if you take none of our ideas and you do an edge to edge on it, we still want to see it.
No, I'm glad to have other options.
For sure.
And I will show you when I'm done.
Yes, definitely. So thank you so much for joining us this morning, Joanne. We loved working on your quilt. We had a lot of fun.
Oh, thank you so much.
Oh, we'll send you pictures
Yes.
Okay.
of the drawings. So,
Yeah, when we're done here, you'll get an email and you can print them out and look at them. And if you have any questions, you can always just reach out to us. Thank you so much.
Thanks for
Joanne.
being here.
Thank you all so very
Yeah.
much.
Have a good day.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Well, we hope you've enjoyed this episode of The Latest Thread, and we'll see you again next time. Bye.
Bye.